Values are great, but most of the time you need to put them in a variable so you can reuse them again, or functions if you want to do some work or do some calculations on them. So in this section, we're going to be picking up where we left off from the previous one, where we learned about strings, numbers, booleans, but we're going to start assigning those values to variables so that we can, use those in our programs. So I'm going to just kind of clear here. We've got JavaScript on the bottom. We've got Elm on the top. What I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be making some variables. So in JavaScript, if I want to create a variable, I can use like the var keyword. I can say name equals Ryan. I can use the let keyword. I can say age equals I'm 123 years old, in case you didn't know that. Or you could use const. That's another keyword in JavaScript. You can say const fav color equals blue. Say my favorite color is blue. So when I use name, I get access to Ryan. Age, got 123, just making sure that I did everything correct here. Oops, sorry about that. We're gonna make sure that those variables store those pieces of information. In Elm, it's just kind of a subset of what you're seeing here. We don't have var, let, or const keywords because the reason we have these in JavaScript is because they do slightly different things. In Elm, there's only one behavior for variables, and it's closest to how const works. So in Elm, when you make a variable, that's it. You're not going to change it later. We'll get into how we work with that in a future video, but if I want to make a name, or I want to make an age variable, or a fav color, I'm not going to use any keywords for that, but I'm still going to be able to access those values the same way that we access them in JavaScript. But you got to spell the variable right. So all these things are now stored in variables. I've got name, I've got age, I've got fav color. That's variables in JavaScript. Something that we haven't talked about yet is functions. So if I'm just going to go back up here. So this is a variable in JavaScript. Let's take a look at how you can make a function in JavaScript. There's a lot of ways to do it. I'm going to start with the one that's kind of most similar to Elm. So we're going to make a function called increment. Oops, increment. That's going to take in a number, and this is what the kids are calling an arrow function. So how an arrow function works is, let's just test to see if it works. Increment 2 gives me 3. Increment 10 gives me 11. Seems to be working okay. So increment is the name of our function, and then to the right of the equal sign, we say like what that function is. So here we're saying it's going to take in a num argument, and the arrow is saying it's going to return num plus 1. So we can define this all as an arrow function where the left of the arrow is the arguments, and the right of the arrow is what's going to be returned. So as you see, as we call these different values, things work as we expect. The increment function is taking in that number, adding 1 to it, and then returning that. So we can store that later or work with it later. So just like we saw with variables, we said name equals Ryan. It's going to look really similar when we're making functions. So functions and variables are so common in Elm that the syntax is really concise. So instead of saying increment equals num arrow num plus 1, we don't need this arrow here, and we just use spaces to separate our function name, which is increment, from our argument, which is num, and then to the right we say what we want to return. So this is the inputs, this is the output, and this is the name of the function. And just like you saw before, we used parentheses to call our increment function. Here we can just pass it in with a space. So this might look a little bit strange if you're new to languages that use white space in this way, like I was. But we don't need parentheses when we call functions. We just say the name of the function, and then here's your argument. And we just use white space to separate that. So that's how it looks with a function that has a single argument. Let me just quickly show you a function that takes 2 arguments, just like this add function that we make in JavaScript. So 10, 20, I get 30. How do we do that in Elm? Well, we start with the function name, and then we use spaces to separate the variables, an equal sign, and then we're going to say a plus b on the right. So this is a function that's going to take in 2 numbers, and it's going to return a plus b. You might be seeing all these arrows that get printed out. We're going to cover what these things are. These are called annotations, and we're going to cover those in a future section, so don't worry too much about them. But the important thing is that when you call add, you can pass it in 2 arguments, and we're going to separate those arguments with white space. So add 10 and 20 is going to give us 30, like we'd expect. There's one other thing that I want to cover, which is there is one other syntax that you can use that looks a little bit closer to arrow functions in JavaScript, and that is called lambda, or inline or arrow functions. So this is the equivalent of what we did here. It's just this version is a little bit more verbose, a little less common, and this one is generally what you're going to see in Elm programs. Inline functions are used when you're kind of like creating functions on the fly. So you might do that in JavaScript if you're working with like a function that takes in another function as an argument, like console log. You might just kind of put a little inline function in there or something like that. So yeah, that's it for functions. In the next section, we're going to take a look at conditionals. How do we work with if, else, that kind of thing. So I'll see you there.